We are eager to hear your assessment of the key challenges ahead and your vision for addressing them. In particular, we would welcome your thoughts on how we can best leverage existing EU instruments while potentially developing new tools to tackle the housing crisis effectively. So, the floor is yours, Commissioner. You have 7 minutes. We look forward for a productive discussion.
Thank you so much, President. And let me first of all thank you for inviting me to this, your first meeting. I think that setting up a special committee like this, just as the fact that President von der Leyen chose to give housing as a dedicated portfolio to a commissioner, both of those things signal to our populations that we indeed take the challenges extremely serious. We know that the housing sector has many problems, that many people are affected in negative ways. So I'm very, very pleased to be here, and I very much look forward to our collaboration. Let me briefly set out the approach of the Commission, why we are taking on this task, what we can do at a European level, and finally how and when we will do it. Let me begin with the why. Over the last 15 years or so, rents have gone up by around a quarter in real terms, and house prices are up around a half. In 2023, around 10% of the EU population spent 40% or more of their disposable income on housing and related costs. And perhaps most sadly of all, the latest figures we have suggests that almost 900,000 people are currently homeless in Europe. Every night in Europe, a population comparable to that of Marseille or Turin is without a home. These numbers and the people behind them are the essence of the housing crisis in Europe. And I think you will share my view. These numbers are simply unacceptable. When nurses, firefighters, teachers and police officers cannot afford to live in the cities that they serve, this is, of course, unacceptable. It has very severe social consequences, but also directly impacts European economy in our competitiveness. The lack of affordable homes where the jobs are impacts entry into the job market and reduces labor mobility, impacting in turn economic dynamism. And that is why we are taking on this task. But what can we do in the Parliament and in the Commission? We know that housing is mostly the responsibility of member states. I can just add that I used to be a member of this House for almost 10 years, from 2004 to 2013, and I don't remember having any discussions on housing. Probably if we had had them 20 years ago, maybe we wouldn't have been in this situation today. But now it is high on our agenda. We acknowledge that most of the responsibility lies in member states, with regional and local authorities, and of course we must respect subsidiarity. But I will also argue, and I'm sure you will all agree with me, that there is clearly room for Europe at the table, and there is a lot of things we can and should do. And it's not as if we're not doing anything already. We are supporting housing at the EU level. For instance, 21.3 billion from the Recovery Resilience Facility has been earmarked for housing reforms and investments. But we can do more, and we will do more. We've planned to double the cohesion policy investments in affordable housing, and we can mobilize public and private investments through the planned Pan-European Investment Platform in collaboration with the EIB and other financial partners. I'm also aware about issues caused by short-term rentals. I recognize how essential tourism is to many regions and cities, but I also hear from many cities, and in particular those who want to prevent negative impacts on local residents, that we can do more. The new EU regulation, which comes into effect next year, will bring much needed transparency, and I'm eager to listen to your thoughts on other ways in which EU can help remedy this problem. We can look at revising legislation, such as the current state aid rules, to see if there are unnecessarily restricting investments in affordable housing also. We can address the supply of housing. We can increase simplification, improve access to materials, advance technological innovation in building methods, remove obstacles in cross-border provisions of services and skilled labor, and help to improve efficiency in how the existing housing stock is being used. So in short, we can do a lot. The only question is, how do we do it? First and foremost, the theme of 2025 will be outreach, engagement and consultation. We will seek open and inclusive cooperation with the different institutions and reach out to external stakeholders at all levels. I am very grateful, Madam Chair, that you will host our first joint consultation event together at the 24th of March with an impressive lineup of speakers. I am pleased that our teams are talking about holding as many hearings together, also looking together at what studies we need to conduct. This engagement will feed into our affordable housing plan, the first of its kind, which President von der Leyen has tasked me with putting forward. The work has already begun. Starting inside the Commission, I'm working closely with my colleagues in our new Commissioners Group on Housing. And since the 1st of February, I'm relying also on a new housing task force within the Commission. But perhaps more importantly, the affordable housing plan must be shaped with all European regions, cities, rural communities, and outermost areas. The direct contact with you, which you have with your constituencies, will be vital. I hope to hear from you, but also from citizens directly. It will be particularly important to organize a youth dialogue on housing, because it seems to me that the vast number of young people are affected by this problem, so they need to have their say in the solution. Let me stop here, as I want to hear your suggestions how we are to approach these difficult tasks. With one final message. I know that the Commission cannot fix the housing crisis single-handed, but as Commissioner I will fight hand in hand with you to support everyone who is impacted by this crisis. We do not have any one silver bullet, but we do have many tools that can make a difference to advance affordable and decent and sustainable housing in Europe. So let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now we start our first round of question. Let me just remind, you have 1.5 minutes for the question, and then there are 3 minutes reply by the Commissioner. We start with the EPP, Nicolina Brunjak.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Jørgensen, the housing crisis in Europe is deeply connected with energy policy. As we work toward a climate-neutral Europe, we must ensure that energy efficiency requirements do not compromise housing affordability. The EPP firmly believes that the green transition and affordable housing must go hand in hand and not create additional burdens on families, homeowners, and housing developers. How does the Commission plan to ensure that energy efficiency rules do not lead to higher housing costs or pushing people into energy poverty? We also see an urgent need to streamline EU regulations affecting housing construction. The current regulatory framework covering construction products, state aid, environmental standards, and public procurement often delays projects and increases costs. Therefore, we call for an immediate review of these rules to eliminate unnecessary burdens and accelerate housing development. When can we expect concrete Commission proposals in this direction? And also the regulation on short-term rentals will provide us with a more transparent data on this after 2026. Could you tell me if the Commission is in the process of preparing specific measures to tackle the effect of short-term rentals on affordable housing based on that data? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very relevant questions and comments. There were many questions, so I probably cannot touch on them all in a few minutes, but I'm sure colleagues will also come back to some of them. The bulk of your questions were on energy efficiency and how to make sure that we don't end up in the paradoxical situation that what we want to do is actually create better homes for people, but in fact it may lead to higher prices. So a few comments on that. One is energy poverty is also a huge problem in Europe. About between 45 and 47 million people last year were not able to adequately heat their homes. Part of that is because of the too high energy prices. We're dealing with that also in a different track. But it's also because many dwellings are simply not up to standard. They're not energy efficient. They're not isolated well enough. The heating sources are not the right ones, and so forth. So there's no doubt in my mind that the right way forward is to make sure that we help as many families and owners and renters in Europe as possible in the future to live in houses that are indeed better suited with regards to energy efficiency. And this House has been co-legislator in adopting in the last mandate a lot of important regulation in that regard. Now, of course, the big challenge is that even though the investments are paid back very fast when it comes to energy efficiency, compared to, for instance, deploying renewable energy or, by the way, fossil energy, it's one of the best investments you can make. Still, I think we all need to acknowledge that there is a danger that it will put pressure on people's economy. So we need answers for that. The EU can support some of these via the different funding arrangements that we have. But I also think it's important that we work very closely with the member states on the implementation of the legislation. As you will all know, obviously it's up to the member states in the end to make sure that and to decide how they wish to implement the rules in the different countries. And we obviously want to underline that this needs to be done in a way that also has an eye to the social impacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Gabriele Bischoff for S&D.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar. Sie sehen, wir...
Thank you very much. We really want to contribute to this Commission programme. Now, I agree with what you've said. This is a horizontal issue. I come from Berlin, and I think we do have a lot to contribute when it comes to our experience of being on the ground. So my question would be, I have heard when it comes to the horizontal working group in the Commission that state aid is also related to that and the single market. So do you really have enough information there from the different services? I think it is important to have that. And as my colleague said, my concern is that there are potential infringement procedures in a number of cities because they've tried to restrict the amount of short-term letting. And we see these distortions that have been caused by Airbnb, for example. But then we have the protection of freedom of services. But you have to weigh that with the citizens' rights and having a right to housing. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And yes, I'm also very sure that the direct contact that you have with your electorates in the different parts of Europe that you represent will be very valuable to us here. And the last topic that you mentioned, short-term rentals, is certainly one, because we have to be very honest that there's very different opinions on what to do about this problem. I think there's a bulk of countries and regions that think we need to do more and that it is a problem. But there are also some that don't see this problem and for whom they want to be as free as possible in deploying these new types of platforms. So I really would encourage you also to all gather information on this to help us in the process, because in my opinion is that even though we have just in the last mandate passed new legislation that will be implemented next year, then we are not where we need to be. I don't see any other way than we need to do more. So the question is, what do we then need to do? So this is one of the areas we'll work closely on. And on the state aid rules, yes, this is one of the areas that I've also been mandated in my mission letter to do something about. The problem, as I see it, and what we hear from member states and from many of you, is that the definitions are too strict with regards to where state aid can be used. There are certain groups that are not necessarily defined as socially less advantaged, or the different wordings that are in legislation now that do indeed need help, that cannot afford the market price. So we need to look at that, whilst at the same time, of course, not ruining the fundamentals of the internal market and distort the commercial housing market. So that's the balance that needs to be found. And indeed, the special group, working group set down in the Commission is one of the areas where we will one of the places where we will take this discussion, but it's also bilaterally between me and Executive Vice President Ribera, who is, of course, the main responsible for this area, and she's very engaged to this. You have probably already discussed it with her yourself, but we will be very focused on finding solutions here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now give the floor to Jorge Villalba.
Sí, muchas gracias, comisario.
Thank you, Commissioner. As you yourself said, housing is a national competence, not of the EU, but it is a competence of the EU to change the directive on VAT. And I would ask you to examine this, the possibility for you to declare exempt or zero rate all the process from the land purchase by the developer to the purchase of the property by the buyer. But that said, I have a few questions that our party is asking in Spain, which I'd like you to evaluate, which is the huge cost of building housing, but the price is caused by scarcity. It's a question of supply and demand. It's basic economics. So housing is something which is necessary, but if you are going to limit the supply, then if you increase supply, then price will fall. So price controls will not work. So you need to reduce costs and bureaucracy and taxes. Young Europeans don't want to live in climatically neutral spaces. They just want a house to live in. So you have to abolish these climatic rules and look at public housing. My party has developed 500 houses in a small village in Seville. This is the way forward. And at some point, Commissioner, we have to realize that subsidizing is discriminating, and you can't decide to give money to some and not to others. The market has its own rules. You have to increase supply, and if you're going to restrict demand, then that's not going to bring in investment from outside. Thank you.
So this intervention also clearly shows, of course, that there are also ideological differences when dealing with this problem. I have many members of the House that would respectfully disagree with you, sir, that would say that actually we need no more state aid and maybe less market. So how do we find these balances? That is what lies ahead of us in the months to come. I will say, though, that even though that we disagree on some issues, I think that your analysis that there is too little supply must be something that we can all agree on. Problem is then, of course, how do we make sure that we get a larger supply? It's not something that can easily be done, and indeed some of the measures that you mentioned, for instance tax, will also be looked at very differently from country to country. And to some extent, that is also, not to some extent, to a very large extent, that is also within the subsidiarity principle. I come from a country, Denmark, with a very where taxes are quite high, and where we have different financing instruments to build social housing, for instance. I know for a fact that many countries would think that that would be an extreme way to go, a very socialized way to go, but I would consider it a very big problem if the EU said you cannot go this way. Just as if other countries want to say, okay, for us the most important thing is to have lower taxes, then okay, it's probably not up to the EU to determine whether or not that's fair enough. Where we need to find common solutions is where we do indeed have instruments from the EU side. We would then probably disagree on how to deploy them, but nonetheless, this problem is so big that we cannot afford not to use the instruments that we have, and so we will probably disagree on the state aid issue, because that is one that I intend to pursue and the Commission will pursue, but I look forward to listening to your arguments in discussing this in the months to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Georgiana Teodorescu for ECR.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Jørgensen, for being here with us today and for addressing our questions. We have just started this mandate, and while our time is limited, I believe we are all striving to cover the most pressing housing issues affecting European citizens. My main concern is the growing number of young people who cannot access affordable housing, leading to significant challenges in terms of demography across Europe. The issue impacts not only individuals' quality of life, but also has long-term consequences for economic stability. So here are my questions on this matter. The first one, on energy efficiency. Since the Green Deal imposes stringent renovations and energy efficiency requirements on house owners, how does the Commission exactly plan to balance environmental goals with housing affordability, ensuring that young people are not priced out of the market due to rising costs associated with mandatory renovations or constructions? The second one, urban areas are becoming increasingly unaffordable while rural communities continue to decline. How does the Commission plan to support policies that encourage young people to settle in rural areas by improving infrastructure, digital connectivity, and economical opportunities in terms of jobs? And the last one, looking ahead to the next 5 years, can you specify how much funding will be effectively allocated to housing projects and what measures are in place to ensure that these funds reach young people who actually need them the most? Thank you.
Thank you so much for focusing on the young. I do think that that's important. Extremely important. It's obviously not the only group in our societies that are facing problems and challenges, but it is a group that's very hard hit, and that's also why I will be having a specialized youth dialogue also on housing to listen to the voices of the youth. Again, of course, we need to remember that even though I think it's fair to say for, if not all, then almost all member states, that there's a special problem with housing for youth, probably when you then dissecate and analyze what is the problem, it will be different from country to country. That goes without saying, but that's also an extra reason for us to make the analysis fast before we make decisions. On energy efficiency, so as I stated a little bit earlier, there's a lot of new legislation in place. and most of it has been made also in this House by the co-legislators. So instead of revisiting the discussion about whether or not it should have looked one way or the other, that's not my job now. My job is to then help implement it, what has already been decided. I will, however, say that although I do acknowledge and understand that when you need more investments into making homes more energy efficient, that can lead to higher prices, that is something we need to deal with. I also spoke on that earlier. We also have to think about what would the opposite situation be like. If we said, for young people, there's no renovation, it's not necessary. Then we would have a generation of young people living in unisolated, cold dwellings. It will not be good for our society as a whole, but certainly wouldn't be good for those young people either. So we need to go the other way. We need to find ways of how we can make these energy renovations and how we can make more sustainable and affordable houses for young people, students, not only students, but certainly also students. And this is also one of the areas where I want to look at best practices. I found that even within countries, you can have some regions where they've more or less solved this issue, and other regions very close to where young people cannot find a house. So, and that's just within countries. Then, looking across our union, the divergence is huge. So let's all go back home to our countries and regions and cities and look at what's working and not working, so that we can share best practices. And if there's then something we can do also with legislation, creating incentives, spending EU money, our funding possibilities, then I'm definitely willing to look at it. On the funding side, this is pretty complex, of course, since there's many different types of funding where EU money can actually help. So I don't have one number I can give you, but the biggest new money that we have put on the table is, of course, the doubling of the amount of cohesion fund funding that can be used from 7.5 to 15 billion, which is a lot of money, especially if it's used in the right way.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Charan Mololi from Renew.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, many thanks for coming to the committee this afternoon. On behalf of the Renew Europe Group, I wish to say we're looking forward to a fruitful relationship with you over the lifetime of the committee and indeed beyond. In your mission letter from President von der Leyen, you were asked to urgently address the housing crisis by supporting Member States to unlock public and private investment for affordable and sustainable housing. Now, this is a mammoth task, as you know, Commissioner, but in this context, one of the initiatives referenced and caught my attention was the Pan-European Platform for Investment for Affordable and Sustainable Housing. From my perspective, ensuring we attract more public and private investment is absolutely crucial if we want to deal with the housing crisis. So therefore, my question today is simple. How is this going to work? Has work started on this? Is work with the European Investment Bank underway? Are there other institutions on board? Can you give us an update today? I can only speak, Commissioner, about my own member state, but in Ireland it appears that the whole construction sector was ground to a halt. Ireland's housing crisis remains one of the most urgent social challenges of our time, and the shortfall in social housing is a key driver of homelessness and housing insecurity. It's crucial we get this sector back to work. Finally, charities and NGOs have consistently highlighted the need for a fundamental shift in how social housing funding is provided and delivered by Europe and at member state level. One of the ways to deal with this is ensuring we have adequate pre-financing of our schemes. To meet demand, governments must increase the social housing budget, ensuring local authorities have the resources to deliver. My last word to a lady called Hannah Clark from St Vincent de Paul in Navan in County Meath. I spoke to her about the housing crisis last week. In the past, she provided food and fuel for couples and families in her area. Now, she's been asked to provide rent. The squeezed middle are now not able to pay their rent, Commissioner. We urge you to do your best to resolve this situation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. I also look forward to collaborating, and Yes, indeed, we will be putting forward a pan-European. There's no sound? Either I'm saying something stupid and you're doing like this, or there's no sound, or maybe both. I could. Okay. Sure. Double up. Okay. Is that better?
If you put this, and you will be better.
Okay. I once gave a lecture in a university where it did not go well. People were not laughing at my jokes. I thought, what is going on? So I asked, can you hear me in the back? And there was actually somebody in the back row saying, no, I cannot hear you. But then there was somebody on the first row that said, I would like to change seats then. Anyway, so can we go on? Yeah. So, EIB and the Pan-European Investment Platform. Later this week, I'm going to Luxembourg and we will present the first steps together with the bank. And it's very clear that this is one of the areas where we can actually do something on a European level, where we can actually spark something in member states. But it doesn't stop here. We need, and all good ideas are very welcome. How can we spark private investments? So, okay, yes, state aids can and will be an important part of the solution in many countries, but obviously the whole, to provide the supply of housing that we need in Europe, it's clear that the lion's share of the investments needs to be, of course, private. So how can we use public, whether it's from member states or EU money, to spark that? That's the big task, and the pan-European platform will certainly be a part of the solution, but also, of course, clearly not the whole solution. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Maria Ohisalo from the Greens.
Thank you very much, Chair. Dear Commissioner Jørgensen, welcome to the first meeting of the Housing Committee. I really expect for a fruitful cooperation between the committee and the Commission. For us Greens, we have particular focus points on housing, although we know that this 1 year will not be enough, but still I hope that we could together focus on tackling financialization of the housing market, strengthening investment in social, sustainable and affordable housing, boosting the housing supply that you were referring to, tackling energy poverty and boosting renovations, regulating the short-term rentals and fighting homelessness. But financialization is what I would like to hear more about today. As we know, financial markets play an important role in shaping housing affordability. As the main responsible commissioner on housing, what steps have you taken so far to ensure smooth cooperation and shared objectives with Commissioner Albuquerque and others in order to make sure that the affordable housing plan that you will deliver later on will also address financial issues properly? And furthermore, what specific measures are you planning to start mainstreaming housing affordability in financial services legislation? Some extra questions still. Have you already initiated a housing affordability evaluation on existing EU legislation in the area of financial services? And if not, will you be doing so later on? And also, are you committed to promoting targeted due diligence requirements for investors in the housing market? And do you plan to integrate those into the affordable housing plan as part of the financial market recommendations? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those questions. No doubt that financialization, speculation in the housing market is one of the areas where we need to really be quite thorough in our analysis, and where most likely we will be able to identify big problems. It's also very clear that I predict that this is one of the areas where we will need to have discussions on the subsidiarity principle, because some member states are saying keep your hands off, others are saying please, we need European regulation. But no doubt the financial markets are also our responsibility as a union at different levels, and that will also of course go for the parts that has to do with the housing sector. And yes, I am of course discussing this with my colleagues, several colleagues, but especially of course Commissioner Albuquerque, and we are also dealing with this specific area in the special commissioners working group on this issue. And I also very much look forward to participating in the dialogue with you in this committee on this exact question, just as it will be a part of the topics dealt with in my dialogue with the different parts of the housing ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Leila Chaibi for the left.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. I speak French. I had several questions. First is about short-term lettings. This was a question asked by the S&D colleague. I'd like to know if you are contemplating a concrete legislative initiative on this. We've seen in Europe, in different cities around Europe, that the local councils have taken measures to reduce the number of short-term lettings, which had a beneficial effect on the supply. Rents fell and more housing was available as a result. Second element regarding cities, 12 large European cities, including a majority of capitals, have launched an appeal for an urgency plan on housing, proposing that investment in affordable housing be exempt from the Stability Pact rules, the 3%, the austerity rules, in the same way as the European Commission has just proposed for investment in defence being exempt from the 3% Maastricht criteria. If we can do it for war, should we not do it also for the right to housing for all? And I'd be interested in hearing your answer to that. Third question is on the financialization of housing. You said we have to be comprehensive in analysis before taking any measures against the financialization of housing. I have a proposal, which is that of European civil society. It's not my own idea. I'm just repeating it. Is a transparency register at European level on investment of foreign funds in housing, that in property. That would allow us to have a clear vision, a clear view of the impact of investment funds, hedge funds on rents, such as we have a transparency register here in the European Parliament for anything that might influence the decision-making in European lobbyists and so on have to be in the transparency register. Perhaps we could do the same in foreign hedge funds investing in property. That seems to me in good sense. What do you think of such a proposal? Thank you.
So I did indeed meet with this group of mayors, and I think it's very, very useful to have gatherings of actually quite different cities around Europe, but that are facing the same types of problems, because they give me and you perspectives that are very, very useful. And I spoke with them last week, and will be continuing to work closely with them. And one of the areas that we also spoke about was indeed the short-term rentals. I mean, it's probably not that normal that a commissioner will say, even before the legislation that's been adopted is implemented, that we need new legislation. Nonetheless, that's more or less what I am saying. Of course, next year when the legislation that's been passed will be implemented, that will give new tools to most countries and regions. And I do think that will lead to some positive changes also, but I don't think that will be enough. So, yes, I will be willing to do that. The next more interesting question is then, what is the content of that legislation going to be? And here I don't have clear answers for you yet. But this also means that this is your chance to influence me on that. Because best practices, good examples, bad examples, bring them onto the table, and let's use also the next months to discuss in detail what can actually be done. Again, the balances is the key word. Right now I see more problems than goods out there connected to this. You always need to be mindful that often the ones having the problems are also the ones that speak the loudest. So we need to be careful that we don't make solutions that then ruin it for many cities and regions that are very dependent on these new platforms. We're talking about also how normal people have problems paying their rent. Well, for some people, having the access to actually renting out their home once in a while, that's what makes it possible for them to actually live in that home. So we don't want to take away that possibility. On the other hand, of course, as you all know, speculation in this, where people are being outcrowded of whole parts of cities and nobody can afford to live there because of short-term rentals, that is a real problem. And over-tourism is a real problem in many places. So I can definitely assure you that this is top of my agenda.
Thank you very much. Now we start our second round. 1 minute for the question and 2 minutes reply. We start with Dirk Gotting for EPP.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. Good luck on this long road to discover what actually Europe can do on housing. I think many people have said very true things about the total catastrophe that is the housing market, especially for young people. But not only that, it is now simply a middle class problem all over Europe, and it touches many people. And we get a lot of questions from back home, from our cities and regions and voters. So when are you going to help? A place where we could help, and some people mentioned it already, is the supply side of things. Because when we talk about, for example, permitting, in especially densely populated areas, urban areas often are, but the Netherlands, for example, you have a lot of people, nature, industry, everything living together on the same square meters. And a lot of European regulations, often to do with our environmental regulations, soil, water, air, you name it, there's a regulation. Is there a plan to sort of look at the permitting procedures throughout Europe, whether this is something that we can build on, how we can make it faster? Because I'm very hesitant on demand-side policies, which often tend to drive up prices also of the houses. Very well-intended policies, but often lead to higher housing prices. What can we do really on the supply side to speed up building of houses in the member states? Thank you.
The issue of permitting is definitely one that we will need to look at. You may have seen that in the Affordable Energy Action Plan that the Commission presented, that I presented last week. This is one of the areas where we are proposing to fast-track permitting. No doubt that most of the legislation made that are today prolonging these processes were made for good reasons. We want to take care of our environment, obviously. We want to be able to control city planning, obviously, all of these things. But on the other hand, if we look at how much delay permitting rules leads to, we do have a problem. I have to be quite frank and say that I know more about this on the energy side than I do on the housing side. On the energy side, we have a clear problem, and we're now addressing it. So I want to use this process also to find out how big is the problem on permitting. To be quite frank, and this is not, I'm not neglecting what you're saying at all, sir, but to be quite frank, I haven't heard that many people bringing it to my table. Netherlands, certainly, yes, your minister's also been in my office. So I'd be very interested to hear also from, I'm sure it must be a problem also in other countries. And even if it isn't, you don't only have to solve problems that are problems in all countries. You can also solve them if they're only a... Exactly. But nonetheless, if they are a problem many other places, please let us know. We will look into it ourselves also, of course, but just to say that input here is very, very welcome.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Alicia Holmes Ginel for S&D.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta, Comisario.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. One is that tourism is very important, and regions like mine, this sector is very important, but it also have negative effects when it gets out of hand. And we also know how important is access to decent housing. And that has led to the debate we're having in this Commission on the increase in short-term rentals, which we know are not helping in regards to the housing problem. We'd like to know if the European Commission is contemplating the possibility of having these short-term lets tax, because we know that it's a business and be treated as such. And then there's also this idea of capping rents at European level, and looking at the results that have been had in places like Barcelona. Are you contemplating creating a legal framework for capping rents? And finally, I'd like you to take into account the youngest generation in the European response to this, because they're the ones who are suffering the most.
Yes, so on the short-term rentals and taxation, that is certainly one of the possible ways of dealing with this problem. Some countries are also doing that. They're deploying tax rules differently on this. There are, of course, single market rules on proportionality and things like that, but it is one of the areas that we will look into as possible solutions.
Okay, now we have concluded the second round, but we have a third round based on Catch the Eye, and I have already 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 people registered and 10 minutes.
Easy.
So I can group them in 3 groups of 4 questions. If you ask the questions 20, 30 seconds, I take 4 questions and I give the floor for the answer, 4 questions and I give the floor for the answer. Please go straight with the question, 20 seconds, and then we can try to make it. I'm trying to accommodate everybody. I understand the strong interest in the topic. Let's start with Regina Doherty for EPP. 20 seconds.
Thanks, Commissioner. I met a developer in Dublin last week, and he tells me that bats and snails have more right to homes in Ireland than people do. So I want to know definitively what you're going to do with regard to our EU directives that are blocking young people, old people, middle-aged people like me from being able to get a house.
Thank you very much. Isenelle Kalinek, still from EPP.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je me permettrai d'insister.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask specifically about financing. So we've talked about attracting public and private investment and the support of the European Investment Bank. Who will be the beneficiaries of the platform? Who is going to benefit? Social partners, private investors, national banks? Are we talking about financing new properties, renovating properties, both? And what exactly would the time frame be for putting in place this platform, and when will we find out? Thank you.
Now Barry Cohen for Renew.
Thank you. In Ireland, we have three primary obstacles remain in relation to housing development: state aid rules, planning, permitting, and not enough private development. If I concentrate on planning or permitting, as you call it, in planning, although it's a national competency, we have issues whereby developments initially awarded permission to construct and having been subject to having satisfied various criteria, policy, legislation, EU directives, ensuring best practice with regards to zoning, density, design, access to infrastructure, amenities and services, as provided in development plans, which are extensively agreed after much public consultation. But if permission is subject to appeal, or permitting is subject to appeal, they can be stalled by the courts all the way to the European courts and can in some instances take up to 5 years to resolve. That is simply criminal. So I am asking, you mentioned European best practices. I would ask you or encourage you or implore you to be in a position to make recommendations in relation to best practices regarding permitting, whereby appeals must be curtailed on timelines, whereby courts must be cut out of the planning process in order to ensure that even if it's for a specific time or a sunset clause, to cater for the emergency that is now and allow that emergency be judged on those instances and those rectifications to see if success can be claimed having done that.
Okay, thank you. Now, Nora Mebarek for S&D.
Monsieur le commissaire, ça va être très simple.
Well, it's going to be a very simple question. I share a lot of comments that have already been made, and I think it's clear that we need to legislate. So what exactly, or when exactly rather, are you going to table legislative proposals? Thank you.
Commissioner, you have 2-3 minutes to answer, and then we have the second round.
Yeah, so for the last question, when will I be putting something forward? So for me, the planning of this has been a bit of a dilemma, because on one hand, I do see this as a very urgent topic, and I do think that people expect us to act fast. On the other hand, I can probably also, I would assume that if I just pretended that this committee did not exist, and I don't care what you will conclude in a year from now, probably you would also voice some criticism. So what to do? Well, what I've decided to do is that I will put forward my plan for affordable housing after you put forward your recommendations, so that I can actually listen to your recommendations. But I will not wait with everything 1 year for that. So I will be working on the issues that I already mentioned, the doubling of the cohesion, the state aid rules and other things. So there will be things going on in parallel. I hope you will support that. I don't really see any other way, but that's how I will do it. Then on the bats and snails, I probably will steal that one. I think that's a good example. Although I will say that there's probably also other committees in this House where actually bats and snails are considered pretty important. And I'm sure you will think so also. So again, this is a question of balance. I would really encourage you all to look at what we proposed last week on the energy side. I'm actually a little bit surprised that it hadn't caught more attention, because it's quite substantial. We're saying that in the energy side, often we have 7, 8, 9, 10 years of time spans for giving permits. We want to reduce that to 6 months for most cases, and not over 2 years for complicated cases. Now, can something similar be done in the housing sector? I don't know. This is what we will look into, but I think you can take that as a signal that me and Commissioner for Environment and other responsible commissioners, we are definitely not in opposition to people who say that we need to make these things faster. There are different ways of doing this, of course. One is looking into best practices of how existing rules are being implemented differently, because there are big differences. Germany is a good example of a country that's doing very well on the permitting side with existing rules in the energy sector. They've managed to cut the times 2/3, I think it is, in average. And I assume We don't have the data yet, but I assume that will also be the case within housing. So when it's within existing rules, we can act now. What's more difficult is, of course, if we need to change rules. I'm more than willing to do that if it's necessary, but you then more than, at least as good as me, you know that then means legislative process going through this House also, with probably also some pretty big fights involved there. Maybe that's necessary. Maybe we need to do both. Too early to conclude, but I'm definitely willing to. On the actual way that the Pan-European Investment Platform will work and the span of it is too early for me to say yet. But we will very soon be presenting the first steps with the EIB that will address the questions that you asked. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The second group of Catch the Eye, we start with Maravilla Badia Jove for EPP.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. We've already seen a lot of the problems that we have in a lot of European countries. Our housing plans are affected by town planning, which is caught up in a lot of bureaucratic processes. It means that there are local areas and regions that can't promote building houses in their regions. So I wonder what you will do to help local and regional governments so it's easier for them to help design their cities. Thank you.
Yes, ahora Georgios Aftias for EPP. 20 seconds before we ask.
I will Dr. Greek. Κύριε Επίτροπε, ευχαριστώ για την απάντηση. 17 Φεβρουαρίου ήταν πολύ εμπεριστατωμένη.
Thank you for the answer you gave me on the 17th of February, which was very good, but I have a couple of questions. The EIB is going to be involved into the situation, and the European Social Fund, and the ERFRD. But my question is, my country, Greece, gets 2 billion from Europe and 1 billion from the banks for the housing program. Does this mean that that the countries that will make use of the banking sector and EU funds will get double as much funding?
Now Maria Zaccaria for the non-screen.
Thank you. In my opinion, we need to safeguard the right to housing for citizens, to drive down short-term rentals, to stop golden visas where we have individual third countries investing in the EU, protect people's primary residences, and ban the servicers' activity in terms of primary residences. I have a proposal to make that has been implemented in Greece since 1954. There was this social housing institution that provided residences to pensioners and working people, and it was not further placing a burden on the budget. It constructed very cheap residences to beneficiaries or gave out loans with small interest rates and subsidized rents for people. Please, your question. And it also created some residential plans for. Is this a proposal that you can get along with?
I need to collect all the questions because we really have no time, and we have the Executive Vice President Vicent Marza for the Greens.
Gracias, Presidenta. Señor Comisario, ha pedido consensos en esta materia.
Thank you very much. You've talked about consensus, and we had 90% of the European Economic and Social Committee talking about a lower interest, more public investment, for example, and not having public debt incurred in this way. So what are the measures you're going to put in place?
Thank you. Dan Jørgensen for S&D.
Thank you. Good to talk to you again, Commissioner. Just very briefly on the issue of homelessness, and I was delighted that you mentioned that in your open remarks. In Ireland, 10 years ago, there was 900 homeless children. Now there's almost 5,000 homeless children. And the Commission's 2024 report on Ireland highlighted that weak tenant protections are a key driver of homelessness in Ireland. So what can the Commission do to bolster tenant rights across the EU to stop this flow of families and particularly children into homelessness?
Thank you very much. Marco Falcone, EPP.
Presidente, velocemente, io ho ascoltato e apprezzato l'impostazione del commissario.
I've listened carefully to the Commissioner now, and the challenges with the timing. Now, what can be done for the rural and insular areas, for islands, and for residential policy in the historic centres of cities? And I'd like to mention also the public held lands and estates.
Thank you very much, Chair, dear Commissioner. Good to see you, good to hear you. In the last 10 years, housing costs has been 60% higher in Portugal. So since you left this European Parliament, our house has got 60% more expensive, okay? We have the income price to income ratio in the OECD for my country is 36% higher than the OECD average and 50% higher than the Eurozone average. So we have a problem. My question is very simple. Can I give a timeline to my voters about the European strategy for housing construction or about the European Affordable Housing Plan? Can I give them dates, hope, numbers, a future in a near time? And
Thank you. I'm sorry, we need to cut. Rosa Estaras, EPP. I apologize.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. Thank you very much to the Commissioner. My question is with regards to market intervention, controlling prices and helping with the offers. That's what happened in Catalonia. The Bank of Spain explained what was being done. It is an issue to intervene in the market and to affect prices. What is your view on that? Do you agree that we should be freeing up land, reducing prices, reducing bureaucracy? Thank you.
Antonella Sberna, ECR, and then we close.
Grazie Presidente, Commissario, grazie per la sua...
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation. I've a question. During this period, like many of us, we have seen a lot of categories who are concerned with this issue. I'm talking here about Italy, but in many other European cities, there are historic medieval cities who are also feeling this impact. Then there's the difference between rentals and landlords. So we need to look at where the burden lies here. So my question is, with regards to what you were saying about the legislative processes, we all know this is very complex. Do you see any flexibility in introducing financial instruments to support member states? And how will the Commission ensure that there isn't too much red tape for citizens? Thank you.
Commissioner.
Okay, thank you all so much for this dialogue, the first of hopefully many. Many of you I know beforehand and have met, others is the first time. I want you to know that I really appreciate this, and you're always welcome to reach out to me or my team. I do understand impatience from you, sir, and others. I share it. This is also why I am also searching for things that we can do that work fast. The problem with things that we can do that work fast is that does not then include legislation and things that then really lead to structural changes. So I'm asking you to help me pointing to those things. What can we do that is short term, that can work fast, that can be implemented tomorrow, whilst at the same time putting in place the structural changes that we need to solve this problem for real long term. This is not an easy task, obviously, and it's even more complicated in this issue than it is in so many other issues that we deal with, because of the subsidiarity principle in this issue. Many countries will say that Brussels, keep your hands away. I have to say, though, that it's not been, when I've spoken to ministers from member states, they've been more positive than I had thought, actually. Some of them say keep your hands off, but most of them are actually very willing to engage, wanting European help. So that's the good news. So I apologize for not being able to answer all of the questions in such short time, but as I said, hopefully this is the first of many. We've noted all of your ideas and questions, obviously, and we'll take them further on board. Thank you. Oops.
Thank you very much. There is no more time. I also have to cut my conclusions, but thank you for our availability. We are all here. We are just at the beginning of the process. I know some member states hands off, but then when they need money, they all come here. So I think it's about time to say, we are not an ATM machine. We are here to think about solutions, analyze problems with open mind and with the contribution of all of us. So thank you very much, Commissioner. And just 2 minutes to allow Executive Vice President Fito to be here.